and currently how our system is operating. And also going forward then really about how we're trying to go ahead and develop recommendations. So each time we meet, kind of help to feel like we're able to kind of center ourselves on what we're hearing. What are some recommendations? So eventually those things can go into the final report. With that said, our first order of business is to go ahead and approve the minutes for the October 4th meeting. They were posted on the LCC website, so hope everyone had a chance to review that this morning. Let me know if anybody needs a second to review the minutes. Hearing none, I am looking for a motion to approve the minutes. And if you do a motion and also testifying this morning, you also can provide your first name. That would be helpful. It's just making sure we're able to record it within the minutes of the meeting. So looking for a motion to approve the minutes.
Jim Schneider make a motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you, Jim. Looking for a second.
Jasmine, I'll second.
Thank you, Jasmine. Discussion? Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Same size opposed? Looks like our minutes are approved. From there, I'm going to turn it over to Commissioner Lindy.
Next, just want to talk briefly about the scheduling of future testimony to the next two meetings. We'd like to extend a thank you to everyone who's helped provide contacts for individuals willing to testify and provide testimonial evidence to our committee as we continue our deliberations. As discussed at the last meeting, we're trying to provide a variety of testimony across a variety of the various categories that were discussed. Those with lived experience, system providers, our system professionals and providers. We also want to ensure that we're including other important perspectives such as testimony from the tribal nations. The response to our call for testifiers has been outstanding, so much so that we have not been able to hear from everyone that has been identified by our members during our meetings due to our compressed timeline. As a solution, we are proposing that this group meet an hour earlier for the next two meetings to accommodate as many testifiers as possible. In discussing available options, we determined that extending the means by an hour, so not just moving it up, but adding the hour, may be the least disruptive option given how packed everyone's schedules are and the difficulty in trying to find another date, possibly another location if the room is not available. We understand that not everyone will be able to make this work, but we wanted to have a brief discussion to hear from your thoughts on this. So interested to your thoughts. We know there are challenges. Some people travel a distance, so maybe like to hear those as well.
Commissioner, the only comment I would have is coming from Cass County would be, how's the traffic between 8 and 9 a.m. to get here? Because that's the only obstacle I have. I don't mind getting up early to come down, but this traffic seems to flow fairly well at 10 o'clock. So who can predict that, right?
I'm not going to comment, so that can be held against me if I say.
Accountability.
But the Department of Transportation is just right over there. I'm sure they could provide some good feedback to us. And I want to make sure it's just for the next two meetings, we're not, but we understand also. And to be honest, there's nothing wrong with coming late if schedules don't, we record everything. There's still ways for us to hear this. I don't know if there's anybody online who's got a comment. So we also just want to note that we have built in time after the testifiers to the agenda for task force members to have a focused discussion about what you've learned. We're asking that you save your reflections and your recommendations for that portion of that meeting, the task force debriefing. The time with the testifiers is all for you to ask clarifying questions so you may have a better understanding of the complex and interconnected issues we are wrestling with. Ultimately, Chair Godfrey and I will review the available testifiers, and if necessary, we'll be making the final decision on who will provide testimonial evidence at our meetings. We will do our best to contact everyone who has been recommended. For those who are not chosen to testify during the committee, we hope that they will open providing information to the group in other meaningful ways, such as written testimony or potentially participating in information gathering interview that will be used to inform our future discussions and the report. We appreciate your understanding as we make those decisions, and most of all, thank you for the number of people that you've provided to us who will provide us, I think, the kind of necessary information that we have. Now I'm going to turn it over to Jackie Brown-Lewis, who will provide us an update on the provider survey and data gathered so far. Jackie.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jackie Brown Lewis. I'm the head of analytics for Law Safety and Justice in Hennepin County, and I'm doing some of the support behind the scenes for the data work as part of this. So first, I just want to give a brief update on the progress of our provider survey. We met with a small group of members and further refined our questions. The final survey questions can be found in your folders from today. We have begun, or we're about to begin dissemination of the survey. It'll probably start today. After this meeting, Mary Ellen will be sending you the link to the survey and some potential language for you to use in communication if you do send it out through any of your contacts or any other avenue that you believe would help us receive the best results. We're asking the survey be completed by November 7th. The team will then collect and analyze the data and provide information to this group at the next meeting. So hopefully we'll be able to give you preliminary results next time we see each other. And I also have a data update. Okay. So we will be asking for some volunteers, either from this team or from people that you know who would be best able to vet our data going forward. And we have received data back from the courts. We have quite a bit to go through already, but I don't want to present any here today because if I present it, it becomes public and I am not the expert on these data. And so I look to you all to help make sure these numbers sound right. There's some nuances that I won't know. What I see are, zeros and ones. I don't see that sometimes there's an order for detention that isn't actually, that doesn't actually occur. Those are things that you all would know and be able to give us that information so that when we present it, that it's accurate and tells the correct story. So you can contact Mary Ellen or talk with me after this meeting if you'd like to be part of that or know someone who would be really well suited to make sure that what we present is accurate. And so I'll go over a little bit of what we do have, and then I have a couple of questions for you as well. So for our bulk of our data is from the court, and we have received this information back from them. Our sample is January 1st, 2019 to June 30th of 2023. We kept it pretty current. I know if we went back further, we could see some interesting trends, but I'm not sure if that's most relevant to this group's work. So it is pretty recent. We're counting each unique youth based on their first entry to an out-of-home placement, and then all subsequent entries would be readmittance. For delinquency cases, we're looking at cases where they have their out-of-home placement post-disposition. And for child in need of protective services, those cases are post-judgment. And for recidivism, we're looking at a new adjudication of delinquency or a conviction. We're going to pull pending cases as well, because these are pretty recent and because of the court backlog, we do want to take a look at those. I would propose that in future, we do look only at adjudications of delinquency and conviction, because that follows kind of the tenet of innocent until proven guilty. So we want to be careful anytime we do include cases where there wasn't a finding of guilt or an adjudication of delinquency. And then re-entry, there's just a new placement ordered for treatment or detention. We're just going to be doing that based on the court data, following that same person ID from the court information system. We have these categories of placement. These came from the court. On the delinquency side, they're fairly straightforward. All of them are relevant to this work, so we'll include all of them. On the CHIPS side, not all of these are the focus of our work. So we do have all of this information from the court. We'll of course provide some summary information to help ground this work. But we're going to probably focus on those highlighted pieces of correctional facilities and residential facilities. And I'm open to any feedback on that focus. Okay, this one is a very real question. So distance to placement, we were asked to measure the distance from a youth's home to their placement. So we have some options for this, and there's some big caveats to them. So the first obvious thought is measure the distance from their address in Minsus to the address in the facility. It wouldn't be a great measure because that address in Minsus is whatever their address was most recently in Minsus. So it isn't necessarily the address at the time of their placement. I would say that we shouldn't use that. The other option is to measure between the county that issued the order and the location of their placement. That would probably be more accurate. It wouldn't be as refined because some counties are pretty large, obviously, but it might be a little bit more accurate. And then another big plus is we'd be able to come up with more consistent addresses. One piece is that to actually measure distances, we need exactly correct addresses or it will not work. So it's a pretty labor intensive process. So we might be able to do it measuring between the county that ordered the placement and the treatment location. But it's still a pretty big if, because we also need to be running this about 100 times. There's about 100 treatment locations in those, all the delinquency placement options, and then those treatment options on the CHIP side. There might be a little bit of overlap, but I talked with our GIS experts and it's a big lift for them to actually measure those distances. If it's really important, we can pursue it. Otherwise, option 3 is rather than measuring that actual distance, something we definitely can do is say whether it's a placement that's within their county, that's within their region, and that's out of their county, out of their region, and then out of state. I included a map. This are the regions of, I think from Department of Human Services, MAXA regions that maybe some of you are familiar with. That seems like a pretty good map that might be able to provide us enough information, and it's something that we could definitely easily complete. So now I'd like to open it up for discussion of those 3 options for how we measure distance.
Say I like the third option. It seems like less labor intensive. Just because I know that some of the youth that we've experienced, sometimes they don't live in the county that they've committed the offense in,
Mhm.
but being able to track at least if it's within their region, I think would be helpful.
We also have one of our members that from online, our participating virtual, that also has a comment. Catherine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Catherine Johnson. And I would concur with that recommendation about the third option. I think there are some inherent challenges that Jackie mentioned, but not just that. I mean, the ability to have consistent, accurate address information, particularly for our clients and their families, is a challenge in a number of areas. I just don't think the data would be as accurate as we would like it to be if we went with actual address.
All right. Any last comments? Okay. We'll go with option 3, and then we'll also look to provide some heat maps that might also help us understand treatment locations and the location that a youth came from, and give that little bit of extra illustration. And so the other variables that we have from the court, we have gender. That's coded only as female, male, and null. We don't have any other options. We have their age, duration of their placement. That one we have on CHIPS cases. We do also have some information from Department of Corrections for placements post adjudication. But I will say, especially treatment for delinquency cases, that might be missing on a lot of cases. We're hoping that we can fill out this data a little bit with the survey and with Department of Human Services. So that might be a little bit piecemeal. The initial offense, we have that from court data. We can match up their case number from the data provided by the court to their case number, and it'll have their primary offense listed. On the CHIP side, there's judgment type and whether this is a permanency case. So whether there's maybe an adoption pending. I'm not sure if that's of interest to this group. That's just something that we're able to look at. And then we'll look at the total number of youth with delinquency cases that are either open or under court supervision, and then CHIPS cases, and the percent of youth with any placement of that whole pie. And then court does not provide race data whenever they fill these data requests, so that will not be included. We can ask the court to provide some summary race information, but we won't be able to take that deep dive by race because we don't have it available to us.
When you said offense and you talked about their initial offense, is this like a disposition order is the offense they pled to or the offense that they were initially charged with?
We can look at both.
Okay. Thank you.
Is there one direction that you think would be better?
I would think that it might make more sense to look at what the actual disposition, what they were charged with, just because I have clients who sometimes are charged with a felony, they're 16 and older, and it's marked by court administration, like delinquency, felony 16 plus, those are open to the public, but then sometimes maybe they'll plead guilty to something like a gross misdemeanor or a misdemeanor. Court administration doesn't go back and like reclassify that, so the way it looks in data may be different than the actual disposition.
For the offense information, it's pretty detailed. I see the
Okay.
actual like statute number
Sure. Okay.
for the initial and the disposed charge.
Okay.
So we're able to look at that pretty darn closely.
Cool. Thank you.
If I could just say something in regards to the race data, I actually think it would be good if courts did track that information, because as we keep talking about all the disparities that are out there, and depending on where that information can go. I mean, if we're truly to lock this down, we do need a hub for that, especially since we are talking about disparities as one of the underlying issues as to why we're all here. So we actually owe it to make sure that we know what those numbers look like, to even see if there's anything that's getting better or worse. So I think that the courts, if we could ask for that information, I think that's very important, because that is a central hub to all of this things listed here.
I agree. I think that probably needs to be part of our report
Yeah.
as a request.
Just to clarify, they have excellent race data at the court. If for anyone who isn't aware, they just don't share it. It's not considered public. So I would agree that it's a big missing piece. If we had that, we would have excellent race data that we could use for this report if they would share it.
Do you know why it's not? I'm
It's-
sorry, it just doesn't make sense.
It's been a standard policy for them for, I mean, as long as I know, it's been in place. I think it was a decision by the Chief Justice. So it's a statewide
Yeah.
choice. It's not,
Yeah, Mr. Chair, my question is, has it been asked recently regarding?
I
Regarding
include,
that data?
I include the request for race every
Yeah.
time.
Okay.
The answer is always no. It would be a much bigger question because the people that I ask aren't going to run it up the chain to the Supreme Court Justice or the administrator to get a no every time. So I would encourage you, if you did want to ask for it, that we get some bigger names than mine on that request so that it gets in front of the actual decision makers. I'm lucky they haven't blocked my email. So I think that maybe coming from someone else might make it to the right set of eyes to actually put that request in. In lieu of that, we can give them back maybe a little bit of information. Maybe we can make it a two-way sharing so they can provide us with some summary race information. We'll see what we can do going that direction rather than having them share that raw data with us. Again, just to try and fill it out a little bit better than what we can do right now.
We have actually a couple of testifiers online and then we'll continue with the panel members. So the first one is Joseph. Good morning, Joseph.
Oh, I'm not testifying.
Oh, not testifying, but you're online with a question. Sorry.
Oh, I think it's worth asking the courts. I don't know how complete their data is. Hopefully they sort of self-survey participants, but if they're just basing it off of whatever's in the court filings, I don't know how accurate their data will be or how
On the delinquency
complete.
side, it would be really good. They have data collection standard of, their goal is over 99% data collection, which can include choosing not to report their race. And it's self-reported. On the CHIP side, I'm not sure where they're at on data collection for race.
We have one more, Catherine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just also add that one of the options we have here, and I think I heard the sheriff refer to this, is as a part of a recommendation in our final report, that this be data that the court shares instead of choosing to remain to continue to hold it as private data. I think there are advantages not just for our discussion, but as we look at the disparities within the entirety of our system, not having access to this race data from the court system is a significant hurdle, again, not just here, but elsewhere. And I think it might be impactful to Jackie's point, where it's not Jackie emailing our Fourth Judicial District asking for data all the time, that there is a recommendation from a group like this to state court that this data be shared, particularly with criminal justice agencies.
Thank you, Kathy. And I think then we have Kathy.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate the question about the why. I know in Ramsey County, we've had many conversations about this with our chief judge. We have had some progress and when we are asking for racial data specifically within Ramsey County. So it's not the broader asking for larger data, but I think one can speculate that nobody wants bad data out there. And by bad data, I don't mean it's wrong data, but it tells you a picture of who's in our system. And I think there's some worry behind what does that mean for me as somebody in this role? How does this look, on my record as a judge? That is me putting that out there. I've not heard a judge say that to me, but I do think that is a worry. And I do agree that I think this should be information that should be out there for us to be able to work with. But I have had, and we have in Ramsey County have had luck when asked to dig deeper into data to get that. So there might be something also to those of us who work with our judges and our chief judges to ask individually so that collectively when the ask comes, it also isn't a surprise.
Thank you, Kathy. Commissioner Lundy.
I was just going to suggest that we could also, as a task force, send a letter from my title is not going to matter at all, but Al's will. So we'll put him first, but we can send a letter asking on the task force. I don't think it's a good hint that we're going to put. If we're going to know, we're going to put that in our task force as a recommendation because we think that's very important. I think it's
Sounds good. Thank you. Joseph.
Yes, would it make sense to entertain a motion to this effect just to officially make that request of the courts at this time?
We can definitely do that as a motion. So I am here a motion for us to send a letter to court administration requesting the race data information for the purpose of for our kind of evaluation of the impact of kids involved in the justice system. So looking for a motion to approve.
This is,
We have to do a roll call vote.
Sounds good. I'm learning this through as we have to do a roll call vote. So, all right.
you need a second, Mr.
I'll
Chair?
second. Jeff was
So do I have to do a roll call vote?
I will. do the roll call. Yes, got it. Nope, you just do the, yep, perfect.
There we go. I'm going to turn this over to Evelyn.
Okay, great. Member Solstad Beckman.
Oh, yes.
Member Bruner.
Nikki Conway from Molly Bruner, yes.
Member Boutte.
Yes.
Member Ellsworth.
Yes.
Member Glassred.
Yes.
Member Godfrey.
Yes.
Member Goodwin.
Yes.
Member Heaton.
Yes.
Member Hernandez. Member Huberty.
Yes.
Member Fawcett.
Yes.
Member Johnson.
Yes.
Member Kern.
Yes.
Member Kirkland.
Yes.
Member King. Member Lundy.
Yes.
Member Madison.
Yes.
Member Morton. Member Neal.
Yes.
Member Niles.
Alex Bunger on behalf of Member Niles, yes.
Member Schneider.
Yes.
Member Stock.
Yes.
Member Thomas.
Yes.
Member Penke Valdez.
Yes.
Member Workington.
Yes.
And Member Witt.
Yes.
Motion
you.
prevails.
Thank you. Thank you, Evelyn. All right. Any further questions?
You had asked a question before about permanency data, and I do think that would be of interest to have that data summarized as well. Okay, thank you.
I have one last.
I was thinking, Jackie, probably have one more slide.
We have summary data requested from Department of Human Services. They do not share raw data, and we don't have time to get a data sharing agreement in place. We were able to get court data because we had an existing order to share their data. So we'll be getting summary data that does include race and ethnicity, and hopefully removal reason. Account currently in their out-of-home care settings, their average length of stay, number of placements, and they have some standard placement information. This is not an area of expertise for me, so I am very grateful to them and all of their work on this and the fact that they have kind of their standards. They have their own language that I don't understand, but I will be asking one of them to kind of meet with us as well to make sure that when we do present our data, that it is accurate and does tell the correct story. Any questions on Department of Human Services data?
So one comment back to the placement categories is based on the reason we're here, foster care, there are a lot of young people that are placed in foster care that are recommended to be placed in residential treatment or at that level. So we might be missing some if we don't include that foster care category. That said, that's going to blow up the numbers exponentially, and it won't be all of the young people who are in foster care. Obviously, that would fit this kind of request. But foster care non-relative would more match up with this DHS data if we included that.
Okay. And they are looking at all youth. So these placement categories are from the court. The court and Department of Human Services also don't share data with each other. So Department of Human Services is looking at kind of the whole pool of youth with out-of-home placements and looking to see the removal reasons. So if there was a removal reason of behavior and mental health needs that then went to a foster care non-relative, we would still see it in their summary data.
All right,
Yeah.
any further questions for Jackie? Very nice. Thank you very much for your work, Jackie, and pulling all the data together. I know this is a challenge, and I'm sure as we talked about, there'll be further recommendations around data. But appreciate your testimony this morning and kind of providing us an update of currently where we are at. All right, we're right on time.
Chair
So the next
Godfrey?
piece- Yes, oh, we have one.
Sorry,
ahead,
Nicole
Nicole.
Kern interrupting. I did have one thing for Jackie. The Department of Human Services does provide a report that's on their website yearly, and it does break down out-of-home placement by type, whether it's a ward of the state and the length of stay. And so it might, I know that would be a lot of work, but it might be a good comparison and to be able to compare some language. It's on the DHS website, and they wouldn't have the most current year, but they would have the years we're looking at, I believe, available.
I think they're going to use, to the extent they can, those same definitions that they already have kind of standardized. So I believe the people I'm talking to are the ones who put that report together, and they're going to kind of summarize it for us rather than us having to kind of piecemeal it together over time.
Perfect. And that does break down whether or not it's a delinquency youth, CHIPS, a ward of the state. And I believe they have race data and everything in that report as well.
Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you there, Nicole. Thank you there, Jackie. Duly noted. So, all right, we are going to move into the next phase, which is really kind of the testimonials. And first of all, want to introduce Layla Smith, and if you can please come up. And she's been invited here by Jasmine. So thank you there, Jasmine Madison, for having her come here today to talk about this experience. So thank you very much. So good morning there, Layla.
Hello, how are you?
Good.
Okay, so I took a little notes here, so if you guys see me looking away.
And could you just make sure the microphone is close so we can all hear you?
Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm here today to share with you all some of my insights within my experience in the Juvenile Detention Center. Before I get into that, I'm going to share a little bit about myself. My name is Layla Smith, and I'm 19 years old. As an adolescent, I made some poor decisions that led me towards the juvenile system. Throughout this time, I was referred to various placements in detention centers and connected with many youth development organizations, such as Generation to Generation, which is where I met my mentor by the name of Dr. Tamara Madison. It wasn't until I was connected with them through probation that I felt as if I was heard as a youth, being at risk within the juvenile system. I believe her first project was by the name of Community Resolution Dispute Center or whatnot. It was a girls group circle. It's where we came in a circle and shared why it was we made the decisions that we made in exchange for a dispute within some of the charges I've accumulated. At the time, I didn't know the sort of favor I was getting from that organization, just being heard and sharing some of my experiences within the juvenile detention center. I would say some of the benefits I experienced within the juvenile detention, excuse me, sorry. I would say some of the benefits I experienced within the juvenile detention center is those who acknowledge and embrace my potential and was able to hear me and get to know me for who I was, instead of the cases that I managed to accumulate, and understanding that we as youth, growing up, we come from nurturing, you know. However, we get influence from being outside. Sorry, I'm kind of a little.
You're doing well.
Okay, sorry. I would share what helped me, which is my mentors, just acknowledging and embracing my potential and helping me create opportunities for myself to grow or something like that.
Facilities have you been to?
I've been to a few group homes mandated through probation for structure, which is what my probation thought I needed, which he was correct. I've been to placement centers out of the cities, such as like Moorhead, Clay County, and St. Cloud. Should I share my experience? How were their facilities? I would say the facilities were overall pretty good, not too bad. What sucked was my inability to articulate my words and advocate for myself when put in positions that made me seem defiant, like questioning whatever it is at the time. No.
Anything you think would have helped your experience?
I would say what would have helped was if there were more placement centers here in the Twin Cities, opposed to all the way out in different counties, to where the youth could be more in tune with, you know, their family and stuff like that, because that was hard. I would say the one-on-one, the direct support, like the mentors and stuff like that within the different organizations, that helped kind of. Sorry. That's all I got.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
So, just two questions. So if you had to think about just a magic wand, like, you know, what if you're now looking at this possibility of kind of redefining how we kind of do juvenile justice, you know, children that are in need of protection services. would you have any recommendations or thoughts? I'm hearing a lot about, you're talking about support and mentoring. Do you have any further thoughts of like going through the process that you think would be extremely helpful for us to know?
I would say, as I mentioned earlier, the organizations that is here located in the Twin Cities. So when it is that kids come to court and they're referred to be in placement centers, they don't have to be too far out to where they lose contact with their family at home. And yeah. That's what I would say would be helpful.
Thank you. Other questions from the panel?
I have a question now. Swana Kirkland, do you think that while you were in custody, if you could still remain or have that same contact with mentors that you had in the community, if they were able to come to the facilities and continue to work with you in that secure space, do you think that would have helped at all, or maybe made the transition for you a little bit easier to have that same connection?
I would say definitely. Upon leaving the detention center, it's hard because if you don't have a mentor or someone who you can go to for guidance and helps of creating that action plan for when you get back into the community, it makes it a little bit harder, especially when being exposed back to the community and, let's say, peers that youth may have hung with and stuff like that. I think that's why it's very important to try and get these youth organizations and the mentors inside of the juvenile detention centers. So you all will be able to help them. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jim Schneider, Layla, thank you again for testifying today. You did a wonderful job. My question is, when you were taken into custody for an offense and you were put in a detention center, at what point in time did you feel like I got to gather myself and then I do need support? How many, did that take a day or 2 days, or if you're going to put a timeline on that, how long would that, does that make sense?
Wait, can you
Yeah, so my question is that when you were taken into custody for an offense and you were placed in detention, at one point in time, did you yourself realize I have to slow down? I have to do some things different. And then what kind of support can I have for me to be successful once I leave this facility? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I once read somewhere that youth are less cognizant of risk given the developmental difference in our brain, which makes us impetuous to the decisions that we make. It actually wasn't me who first acknowledged my potential. I didn't see it. My mentor did. And she kind of just pulled me aside and encouraged me to use my voice and at least try to be assertive when it came down to why I made certain decisions, in hopes to help me create opportunities for myself. Yeah, like today, for instance, my ability to still sit here while like I'm shaking in my boots.
You're doing great.
Yeah. I think that's very important. Just to have that role model figure, because not every youth has that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. Go ahead.
So you talked about the importance of having a mentor for when you got back into the community, and it made reintegration a little bit easier. What other things could you, I guess, do you think you had all the tools you needed to reintegrate successfully, or are there other things that you think could have made that a better transition?
Absolutely. No. I had to bump my head a few times, and actually sit down with myself and ask myself what I wanted. And ask the right questions if I was ever confused on what that looked like. Cause my upbringing, I don't, not to discredit those around me who tried, but I didn't necessarily know what that looked like to pave my own way. When talking about the numbers, like the statistics and what was supposed to happen. Like, I don't know how to explain it, but it was meant for me to experience all of which I did, good and bad. Put my life on the line, my freedom on the line for me to be here today. And to take my life seriously in a sense, and to see like, I don't know, a bigger vision than what I'm used to or whatever. I don't know how to explain it. Sorry.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
Kathy Hedin, Ramsey County, thank you again for being here. I know it's not easy. I shake in this seat sometimes too. You did a good job. So you talked about the people around you. So were there resources provided to people who wanted to support you, but they didn't have the tools necessarily to do that? Or were you aware of any resources that were provided to any family or friends or relatives or, you know, those who you hope to rely on to help you as you came back in the community?
Fair enough. Throughout my experience in the juvenile system, whenever it is I was referred to different organizations or resources per se, I was always reluctant, not understanding the intentions of those who referred me to these places. And, you know, as an adolescent, we always think we know it all and that we're right. So I guess it wasn't until my mom proved me right with one of those kind of, I told you so. That's when I was transferred to Moorhead. My mom always told me, like, this is not pertaining to what you just asked, but the fear of being sent somewhere hours away to where your family's not able to come up there and support you. My mom always warned me about that. I didn't believe it. Probably because I noticed something, at least now, I didn't notice it then. My first few charges or whatnot, my run-ins with the law, always got a slap on the wrist. I don't know if that's good or bad. And I still don't really understand the importance of slapping kids on the wrist. But the more you let a kid, or we gotta understand here, like the development of a kid's brain or a brain of one's who's not fully developed. If I get in trouble and there's no true, what would you call it? Consequences for it, I wanna think that it's okay to do it again. I didn't realize, but I kept on falling into this system of being slapped on the wrist until I was in Moorhead County on my 18th birthday. It was, I don't know why this is important, but I'm sharing it with you guys. The slaps on the wrist for the kids and keeping them in there till they're 18 in hopes that when they get out, they make the same decision and you don't have to worry about them again. It's not a good system. Sure. Try to get the organizations inside of the juvenile detention centers before the kids come home to create that action plan.
And Layla, can you share with them how old you were when you first got involved with the judicial system?
Well, it's a while ago. I believe I was maybe 13. 13 years old.
Question, Mr. Chair.
Yes, no.
Thank you again for your testimony.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. Sometimes you get to be my age and shaking at meetings might be your only weight loss program, so. My question is related to looking back at the facilities that you were in and seeing now from a hindsight, looking back regarding education, daily activities, things like that, life skills, maybe teaching skills, those types of things. Do you feel like those facilities were helpful to you with maintaining your education and teaching you some life skills in general? And what could you tell the committee about how you see those things now as opposed to how you saw them when you were there?
Absolutely. I would say yes. I know some of the placements that I've went to or detention centers that I went to, school is a mandatory thing. They keep us on top with our schooling and while trying to express the importance of school, because being a teenager, I didn't really understand the importance of it. Me growing up in a lesser funded community and exposed to like less resources or whatnot, I started to believe that's exactly what school was for, kind of that structure within like the working culture, being presented with the assignment and being able to complete the assignment without shaking, you know. Did you get Richard? Nobody contact? Okay, cool. I would say yes. It helped me enhance my social skills. My perspective now, opposed to then, I would say I have a greater appreciation for the little things in life, especially being in those facilities where you're in your room 23/1. It's not, you don't get used to that. You know, it's not nothing that a juvenile, a teenager who's, I feel like, I don't know, I'm at a loss of words when it comes to the way of the detention centers, the placements. I can make comments on those. I feel like the placement centers, it gives that structured for the youth, but the detention centers, not so much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, of course.
Any last questions for Layla? Well, thank you very much, Layla. It takes a lot of courage to really, sit up front and tell your life story and and you provided us really a lot of valuable information this morning for us to really take back and contemplate and reflect on. So you did a fantastic job. So really just appreciate your testimony this morning and wanting to come up here and do this. Thank you.
I would just like to say thank you so very much for the opportunity to be here and speak. And kudos to all of you who is able to give a solid presentation without stuttering.
Thank you again, Ms. Smith. Just next, we're going to hear a written testimonial statement submitted by Christian Deal from the Otter Tail County Human Services. I believe Lynn is going to read that on the behalf.
Thank you, Commissioner Lundy. I'm Lynn Penty Valdez. I'm the Deputy Administrator at Otter Tail County, and I'm here representing MAXA as well as Greater Minnesota. I am humbled and pleased and honored to read to you testimony written and submitted by one of our permanency social workers at Otter Tail County, Christine Deal. She's been with our organization for about 6 years. She started as a child protection social worker and started working with permanency about 2 years ago. And I'm shaking in my boots as well and hoping I don't get the questions that Layla got. For children who are For children who are court-ordered into out-of-home placement, Otter Tail County Human Services case managers find there is a lack in services for youth with complex needs. Where there are certainly services within, for example, the Caddy waiver to assist in supporting these youth, we have found that there are no providers of that service in our county to offer to the youth and family. An example of this would be positive behavioral supports. The youth we serve are often exhibiting challenging behaviors, including prior or current sexual misconduct, criminal behavior, physical or verbal aggression, property destruction, chemical use, and or running away. When providing case management services to this population, we experience difficulty in locating placement services. This is particularly challenging in Greater Minnesota, as we find that facilities in other counties or regions prioritize their county folks first. Family foster homes are not equipped to manage children's safety. Hospitals have denied due to challenges being chronic, but not acute. Additionally, facilities or hospitals are recommending different levels of care, which are not congruent with admission policies for the recommended level of care. And within Minnesota, there are very limited resources at each level of care recommended. As an example, a children's residential treatment facility recommends an inpatient locked level of care. Emergency department evaluates and determines safe to discharge to the community without the need for inpatient or residential. Another example of a challenging circumstance is when a youth has committed a crime when in a facility, they will be arrested, brought to secure detention, and routinely released within 24 hours at the in-custody hearing, yet the facility where the crime occurred denies their return. When looking for possible residential settings, the list of behaviors listed above becomes reasons for denial of placement, or if in current placement, become the reason for immediate discharge. With most residential placements being out of county, there is a barrier for families participating in the child's treatment for reunification. We support where we can by assisting financially for mileage and visits with youth, but distance of placement remains a barrier for children and their families. The lack of a true continuum of care for children exhibiting these behaviors leaves children and agencies in untenable circumstances. Children are being boarded in emergency departments as a way to meet their immediate safety needs. During board stays in the hospital, children are often unable to receive recommended services, including therapy, psychiatry, etc. This is further exacerbated in rural Minnesota, where emergency departments are not equipped to the extent that metro hospitals are, for example, having school options for board patients. A true continuum of care for children or youth is lacking in all of Minnesota, including rural communities, and is desperately needed. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Matt Bauer. Mr. Bauer is the superintendent of Dakota County Detention Facility. He is also a member of the Minnesota JDA, so the Minnesota Juvenile Detention Association. I'd like to welcome Mr. Bauer.
Thank you. Morning, my name is Matt Bauer. I'm the superintendent at Dakota County Juvenile Services Center. I'm here today representing the Minnesota Juvenile Detention Association, or MNJDA. I have over 27 years working in juvenile justice programs throughout my career. And I hope I can provide some insight into what's going on in MNJDA facilities and juvenile justice for you today. MNJDA has 11 members that offer secure programs. Those would be secure detention and secure treatment programs. And they also offer non-secure programs, both detention and treatment programs, licensed under the Minnesota Department of Corrections. Our current landscape, I want to share a little bit about where we're at as an association and the state of our facilities. Referrals to Department of Correction licensed correctional facilities have increased post-pandemic. Many of these referrals are related to have mental health needs and increased service needs because of lack of other programming maybe in the community or residential treatment to serve those youth. Some regional facilities throughout MNJDA has increased their contracts with counties, so they've increased and expanded their capacity to serve. while others are maintaining their current capacity, and this is for a variety of reasons. There are two capacities to consider when looking at the available beds for youth in our MNJDA facilities. One, quite simply, is the bed space and the staffing ratio. For example, Dakota County is a 40-bed facility. We have an 8-to-1 staffing ratio that we budget for and we staff for. So in reality, our staffing capacity or our resident capacity is 36. That's one capacity. The second capacity is your ability to safely serve youth in your facilities amongst a variety of challenges that we are facing every day. These challenges include staffing shortages, retention issues, inexperienced staff, youth with significant mental health trauma. Rule 20 evaluations. Rule 20 is competency evaluations. Those youth, severe aggression and safety needs of youth. In many of these situations, we develop special staffing plans for those youth. Some require one-to-one staffing, some require small group size. So when I go back to the capacity of Dakota County saying 1 to 8, but then you're serving youth that cannot function in a 1 to 8 setting, that impacts your overall capacity as far as how many number of youth you can safely serve in Dakota County on any given day. And again, you know, the incidents and the challenges that we have with working with the variety of youth we have, that also impacts the retention with staffing. They're all kind of tied together. The overall safety of the facility, how many critical incidents you have, the experience of your staff to manage those critical incidents. And if they can't manage them, then the incidents become more heightened. And then the retention does get impacted by that even further. So it's a challenge, and I will promise I'm going to share some highlights at the end, not just challenges. You know, we've had recent reform over the use of room time or disciplinary room time. The state ordered that starting January 1st, a youth cannot be placed in his room for discipline, but can only be placed in his room for safety. That is reform that we supported. We knew there needed to be reform. We knew we needed to do better. And we feel like as a facility that serves most of the youth in Minnesota, we should be held to the highest standards. But we did voice concern about some of the language throughout that process because we needed to continue to provide a safe environment for the kids and for the staff. And there were certain times throughout that those reform efforts that some of the language was concerning that we wouldn't be able to do that. But by no means was MNJDA opposed to reform and doing better for our kids and keeping their kids out of the room. And I want to share that because that was a big, we're involved in a lot of discussions around that area last year. But that change from a model of changing from a punitive model to an incentive-based model is also something many facilities are taking on throughout MNJDA. We're trying to keep kids out of their rooms based off incentives rather than room time or a punitive measure. So that is a big challenge for us. I'll talk a little bit more about some efforts that we have in place around that, so you for a better understanding of that. And I do want to talk a little bit more about the mental health needs of the kids we're serving and that crisis that is going on in Minnesota. I mean, statistically, you know, 70% of youth in the juvenile justice system at any contact point have a diagnosable mental health problem. But also the research will tell you that the deeper you get into the juvenile justice system, when they survey or evaluate that percentage is higher and higher the deeper you get into the justice system. MNJDA serves that we're the end of the line in Minnesota. We are the end of the continuum of care in our justice system. So we serve the kids with the highest rates of mental health and the most severe mental health in the state of Minnesota. And when there's gaps in our continuum of care, we serve even more kids with mental health. So when there's residential treatment programs licensed maybe by DHS that don't have the capacity to serve kids, these kids are going to get their needs met somewhere. If there's not community-based, maybe they're going to behaviorally not be able to, I want to use the right word, not be able to maintain in the community because of their mental health is contributing to their behavior, and they end up being arrested. Maybe law enforcement has been out to their house. 5, 6, 10, 12 times in the last month. And there's nowhere to put this youth. So eventually they're going to charge them with a delinquency. So we get those youth in our facility that need those unique high-level mental health needs met and served in our facility, along with the safety and security needs. And then also we can talk about the level of trauma that we see with these kids. Statistically, these kids have at least 4 or more traumatic events, which is a very high rate of trauma in their lives. So I want to also talk about some possible areas of focus as we move forward, as we just, talked about the mental health kids in our facility. There's an opportunity for some increased collaboration between DHS licensed programs and DOC programs. There's an opportunity for us to collaborate and partner with some of these youth. I can share an example of when a youth is in a PRTF, a psychiatric residential treatment facility. Sometimes when they become aggressive and unsafe, they get kicked out of that program. They're in that program because the treatment level, the mental health treatment level meets their needs in that residential program, but they could not manage the safety levels. So then they get kicked out of that program. And a lot of times they may end up in a DOC licensed correctional facility. So potential down the road, do we collaborate with those residential treatment programs? Does the treatment plan come to the correctional facility? We stabilize their safety and then they return to the level of mental health care they need. That's a possible solution I wanted to share that MNJDA has been discussing. It doesn't have to be your kid and then your kid. This is our kid. And do we have one treatment plan? Funding mental health services and DOC licensed correctional facility programs in MNJDA. We would be the first to say in MNJDA, we are not the long-term solution for the mental health needs and care of kids in Minnesota. We don't want to be, and we should not be. The reality of this situation is these kids are being served in MNJDA facilities right now, and they will be served there next year and probably the following year as we rebuild our continuum of care. We should consider funding mental health services in correctional facilities on a short-term basis, not a long-term solution. But on a short-term basis, we need to deal with the reality that these kids are in correctional facilities, and we should fund mental health services in those facilities. I'll share a few highlights before I open up for questions. Again, we fully supported the reform efforts around disciplinary room time. We needed to make sure it was safe for staff and youth. We are kind of the experts in that work. We knew we had to do better. We knew we had to make improvements, but we also knew we had to be careful how we did that reform. We had to make sure that we could manage safety in our facilities. Our commitment to serving youth in the state of Minnesota right now, we are throughout every facility. We have strong staff who are committed to providing kids opportunities to be the best they can be. Very proud in Dakota County and other facilities of some of the core staff that are just committed to these youth that have nowhere else to go. And that's a highlight that we need to highlight. MNJDA administrators and a leader, Amy from the DOC, and went to a youth in custody certificate program at Georgetown University at the end of June. We learned best practices around reducing room time and serving youth best in custody programs. We're completing a capstone project on our use of reduce of room time in Minnesota. We are committed to that reform. We're committed to best serving our kids and keeping them safe. Some of the strategies from model sites is moving to that incentive-based programming instead of a punitive model. Increased programming and services for kids. Adolescence is a time of great opportunity for brain development, and kids are interested in learning and growing. So all of us are pushing ourselves to provide more programming and opportunities for kids to keep them busy. But the number one strategy for model sites throughout the country on how they reduce room time was increased staffing. That was the number one strategy. And it might be as simple as the discussion that came up earlier with this young person who shared her testimony. Having mentors, having in DC, which is a model site, they had community navigators who were employed by the facility, who their own job, and they had unique backgrounds, maybe backgrounds that the kids could relate to that looked like them. And they similar backgrounds, and they could talk about their experiences. Their sole job was to work with kids that, you know, these at-risk kids that we may have to program one-to-one or can't program in large groups. Their sole job was to mentor them throughout the day and to keep them stabilized and on point, so they would have a good day. But there was no funding also tied to the elimination of disciplinary room time and stuff like that. So we're all kind of scrambling a little bit too, to make sure that we can increase and have enough staffing in our facility through a hiring retention crisis to meet that need, the needs of these kids. And the whole philosophy, I didn't really come here to speak solely about DRT, and I'm not, but we're switching our philosophy, our model from disciplinary room time to a safety stabilization period. And we're doing that statewide in every facility. So we're only going to put kids in a secure room when they're unsafe. There's going to be a lot of oversight to that use of safety time. And there's going to be a lot of requirements to work with those youth to get them to a point where they're safe to come out of their rooms as soon as possible. And I think that's the reform that everybody wanted to see, and that's the reform they're going to see. And that, in a nutshell, is kind of the state of MNJDA, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
But Mr. Chairs, Jim Schneider, Mr. Bauer, do you have some comments as an organization about how the education system operates within facilities?
Well, we do have some challenges with, summer school. If they don't qualify for summer school, even though they're behind in certain credits or whatever, they can't participate in summer school because of funding issues. And, if they've graduated from high school or have a GED, they can't participate in the school program. And then we're also throughout MNJDA, different facilities have different levels of investment from their school districts that work. And I think we know when we invest and we're involved and you with the youth in our facilities, you'll see better outcomes as far as in education and stuff like that. One of the highlights, though, we do talk about is I'm constantly hearing statewide about high school graduation parties and celebrations within correctional facilities and youth that were not on a track to graduate from high school, graduating in those facilities. If there's anything more specific about education programs, I'd be happy to go into that.
Just one follow up, individualized education when kids come into our facilities.
Yeah,
it's just important to identify and then try to get a plan moving forward, and then of course transition them back to an education system in the community. So more so of a comment than a question. So
yeah. Please.
Thank you. Thank you, Matt, for being here. I'm Kathy Hadeen from Ramsey County. First of all, our JDAI team also got to go out to DC to see that work, what they do. It's amazing the number of navigators that they bring into their system and the mental health resources and the school connection and the amount of funds that they get to do that work. I'm a little jealous. I do have a question based on a question that you asked, Solana, earlier, and then something that you stated. The earlier question was, would it have helped to have mentorship in the facility? You talked about funding mental health services within the DOC programs. It's not something that you've done in the past. Is this, my background is not in corrections, so I continue to learn in this space. Is not providing these type of services within juvenile detention centers due to a policy or a rule, or based on funding alone?
It's not based on policy or rule, and we do provide services throughout MNJDA. And I think we're just seeing an increase over the last year or two in the needs of mental health with mental health and how that contributes to an unsafe environment. When you have a person with significant mental health who has to program in a group of 6-7 kids, maybe because of a staffing issue, and cannot stabilize or remain calm in those situations, things can escalate quickly. So And the other thing is, you know, a real situation in Dakota County is we contract for therapy. We've had a vacancy in our contracted therapy position for 5 months. They cannot find anybody to come work in a correctional facility. I don't know what it's gonna take to do that, but I also know the kids in Dakota County need that service, and we're being creative about how we're gonna fill it and increasing our commitment, both financially to making sure those services are provided to youth. So when I talk about funding, I'm not saying there isn't funding already there and there's not services. I'm advocating that there should be more. And I think because of the gap in our continuum of care right now in Minnesota with residential and hospitals are at capacity, and secure psychiatric hospital has a capacity of, you know, 5 or less or whatever it is each day. I don't know. The reality of the situation is a lot of these kids are in our correctional programs. It's not our long-term solution. It should not be. Minnesota can do better than a correctional facility to treat mental health. But in the short term, we should support those services and make sure those kids are getting the level of care they need.
Thank you.
Yes.
I believe online we have Nicole. Question?
Thank you. Mr. Bauer, as always, you are an excellent presenter and you are an excellent speaker. The question actually that I have is something you were just touching on, but is the Detention Association seeing a rise in the need to charge counties for double staffing some of these kids who are just requiring more? Recently, we had a youth who could not be maintained by the staffing level that was available. So we paid a higher rate just to make sure that child had somewhere to go. That's the state of what we're seeing. And I'm wondering if that's something that the detention facility has seen, and if that's something that we can shine a light on, that obviously we need options for these mental health kids. Thank you.
Yes. I mean, yes, that is more frequently happening where increased staffing, sometimes they have to agree to an increased per diem rate with another county to pay more because of the increased cost for the facilities. I think as we move into our new updated per diem rates in the next year and the following year, there are going to be significant increases in the expense to other counties, just because the cost to run these facilities to make sure you have enough staff on. And if you have inexperienced staff, sometimes you need more inexperienced staff to accomplish what you could accomplish with experienced staff. And that's what we're dealing with. And we've made investments too. We've been, I know a number of facilities have invested in training coordinator positions and an increase in training to meet the needs of the current workforce. But we're still kind of not at full capacity for what we can manage in as far as our bed numbers and that staffing ratio. A lot of us facilities are not at that full capacity yet because of the retention and staffing issues and the training issues. And the type of kids we're working with. Yep.
Yeah.
Actually, I was on kind of the same theme that Nicole just asked a question about, and maybe it'd be helpful that Mr. Bauer, if you were able just to provide some information about how are you funded? And who provides the funding for all of the 11 correctional facilities that are out there? Does your per diem rate that you charge actually cover the full cost of this? So maybe people have a better understanding of, so maybe how you're funded and maybe some of the challenges that come in with that as well as to all of the facilities across the state as to kind of equity of services, those type of things.
Sure, there's facilities that are regional facilities, and they have member counties who commit funds and money to that facility, and they have usually a reduced per diem rate. And again, there's only so many member contracts that some of these facilities can take, because if you take a contract, you have to fill that contract. So if you have a facility that's teetering on the edge of unsafe because of what's going on, and a contract member calls and says, we have a kid and we want him in our contract bed, you're taking that kid. You're not, because you have that contract. There's other facilities that don't have contracts or members. So for example, Dakota County We focus primarily on Dakota County youth. And then we take probably maybe a third or a quarter of our daily population. We serve other counties without a contract. They just pay the per diem rate. Without a member contract, I should say. So the Dakota County facility is run through funded all through the county. The actual cost to serve a youth in Dakota County daily is I think it's just over $1,000 would be to cover all the expenses, maybe a little bit more. And then we charge other counties $345 a day as a per diem. That is probably, there's 2 or 3 facilities around that amount as kind of the high end, and the low end of per diem is probably around $290, $300. So there's not a whole lot of difference in the statewide per diem. So it's county funded in most facilities, unless you're a regional facility, and then you have multiple counties that partner into that overall expense. Because you're not, it's the expenses outweigh the revenue in those county run facilities. And Ramsey County Detention and Hennepin County Detention primarily just serve Hennepin and Ramsey, so they don't serve any other counties. So they're funding that program, their county, and taking on all those expenses themselves.
Mr. Godward, maybe I could comment. I serve on the board of the Juvenile Center in Bemidji. It's a joint powers agreement between 8 counties that is funded strictly on per diems from intakes. And so that's how that operates up north.
I was just curious, Mr. Bauer, do you feel just based about even how the funding is provided and there might be some equity issues there where some facilities may have some option for more programming compared to others?
Well, when we talk, funding is an opportunity to provide services to kids. And so when we talk as an association about what each facility needs, it's really interesting to see the difference in what they need. In Dakota County, as I mentioned, we're really struggling with that mental health therapist and the needs of that service because it was a contracted position. But in another county, they're having great success maintaining that service. And then another facility is looking more for that mentorship in that community navigator position. And another county is looking more for some stabilization positions where maybe it's not the community navigator, but it's people trained in special mental health and trauma skills to de-escalate the youth. I don't see a big difference between staffing and funding from outstate to the metro or anything like that. I think we all have the similar issues. But I don't think anyone is saying it's a funding issue. We don't have the money to hire enough staff. We don't have the money to do this right now. We don't have the staffing to fill those positions. We don't have the people. And but the reality is the kids are there, so we have to solve that problem. In Dakota County, we may have to invest more to have a therapist in a secure correctional facility, because the reality is there are no contracted therapists that want to work in that facility right now.
And maybe just one last question. I know there's somebody online as well. Cool. We'll go next. My magic wand question, but if you had to think about, you're talking about staffing and facilities and even the potential, if you have dollars that are added, it's still having a hard time trying to find bodies to fill those positions. When you think about programs and services and kids in reentry and those types of things, from a funding perspective, is there any recommendations out of MJDA that could help feel like we're able to kind of cover that gap and feel like we're able to provide service for kids within the facilities and that are coming out and back into the community? So here's any thoughts that you have on any type of recommendations around funding or ways that we can better support facilities and services that they're able to provide, not the staffing, but the services.
Yeah, and well, I think transition services and moving kids out of facilities is definitely an area that there's an area for improvement and growth. So much of the core focus is on keeping youth and staff safe and providing them services in the facility. But with some investment we should be looking at what is the transition plan and how do we support them when they get out in the community and start those supportive measures while they're in the facility. And because we always have discussions about sometimes how the youth have really made significant changes in our facilities and significant progress and really have a strong commitment to doing well when they leave our facility with no real desire to return, which is great, right? But within a few weeks or a few months, some of those supports in the community break down or they're not there and they find themselves in some other high-risk situations again, or returning to high-risk situations without that support in the community. So yeah, I do think that funding and transitioning for kids and support in the communities is definitely a piece of this solution that we need to consider.
Thank you.
So, excuse me, Dwana Witt, Hennepin County. Matt, always good to see you,
Yeah.
of course. So I'm not sure if this applies to juveniles, but I know it's something that I've been supporting and following as far as adults that are in detention settings. It's the 1115 waiver. Nobody's heard it here. But one of the things about that 1115 waiver is it helps increase the continuity of care in retro. Okay, so when we're talking about getting kids help, treatment, and medical, I wonder if this is something that, and again, I apologize, I don't know if our juvenile population is affected by that. But if it is, that 1115 waiver is something that will help with some of the things that we're talking about here today, which is the funding to get them that service and that continued service that it doesn't have to change because they're discharged from any of the facilities. But that's something that maybe should be looked in again. It's called the 1115 waiver. I know that there's now 9 states, I believe 9, if not 10 states that have adopted it. And I know that that's something that we're pushing at the next legislature.
Are we talking about medical assistance state? Yeah, and how in juvenile correctional facilities, it stops once they come into our facility. Some days it doesn't stop immediately, but within a couple of weeks, it's discontinued and stopped. So youth in juvenile correctional facilities in Minnesota do not have insurance or medical funding.
So it sounds like it would benefit.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, we are having testimony on December 13th. The Department of Human Services, they just completed a residential study. And that will be part of part of their testimony will be on the 1115 waivers.
Is there any more questions? Okay, Nicole online, please.
Hello again. Matt, could you discuss what we're seeing on the corrections juvenile justice side is that there's an increase of youth placed into non-secure detention by social services, health and human services, because they don't have anywhere for those kids to go. And one of my concerns is that evidence-based practices talks about we're taking youth who may have no criminal history and we're putting them in an environment with youth who do. And the data and research shows that we're increasing their likelihood then to end up in the criminal justice system. So if Al asked me my magic wand, it would be that the commingling of those youth would never have to happen. I know that that's not possible, I don't think, in a facility, but has there been any discussions about how to try to keep those youth separate? I'm sure staffing would impact that as well.
Yes, so as I started with describing MNJDA, there's several facilities that operate non-secure programs within their campus. And so on a non-secure program at a correctional facility, they can take social service kids. Legally, you can hold a social service kid and a corrections kid in a non-secure program. There are different holds. A corrections kid would be a court order or a detention hold, but there could be a social service hold or a welfare hold for a social service kid. Our facilities that I'm aware of do a lot of classification with those youth. So they separate and try to program them by risk. And so some of that is addressed in that area. They also receive an incredible amount of pressure from social service and corrections to take kids that have nowhere else to go. So they're trying to respond to the needs of the community. And also, as Nicole said, keep kids that probably shouldn't be mixed together separate as much as possible. The reality of the situation is that doesn't always happen. Sometimes there's a social service kid programming with a corrections kid. And the research, as Nicole had stated, says that you should not mix those kids because you could impact the risk level of the social service kid who is not in the justice system. So I didn't say that it didn't happen. I didn't say it. We have a lot of discussions about how we minimize that risk, but it is happening.
I have Diane online.
Hi, just getting back to the staffing, and I really appreciate this testimony. Thank you. But getting back to staffing, when you were talking about therapists, have you guys contracted with therapists? You're talking about hiring your own, like, are we talking DOC hire? Or are we talking contract with providers and community, both?
Yeah, we've contracted for years and years and years with community-based organizations. Large names, if I mentioned the organizations, most people in here would know who's running those organizations. It's common. They've been posting, they've been providing hiring bonuses and raising salaries to their ability, but they're not finding therapists that want to work inside a correctional facility versus some of the flexibility they have and the demand they have. There's just not enough therapists in the community.
And there's no incentives that you're aware of at this time to allow for that or increase training to work with the dual needs of the kids that you're aware of?
I kind of missed the first part. Can you repeat that again?
So are there any incentives that you're aware of, increased incentives for therapists, mental health professionals to be able to work in that facility, to incentivize that a little bit that you're aware of? And are you aware of additional training that's been provided over the past that addresses the dual needs, the high acuity along with the behavioral increased aggression?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of creative work around this. So, and in Dakota County too, it's, if we somehow move this contractor position to a county position, is it going to be more attractive for somebody to come in with a different level of benefits and maybe a higher level of pay? So we're having those discussions, but there's been no increased funding from the state or at that level to help support these facilities do that creative problem solving. And I think, really I'm here today to say that, these kids are in our facility and we have to invest whatever it's going to take to meet their needs, especially in the short term, as we try to rebuild our continuum of care and our mental health services for kids. The reality, everyone in MNJDA, all my peers would say, a lot of those, if many of those kids that aren't being served right now because of the gaps in our continuum are finding their way in and out of our correction system and are being served in our juvenile corrections facilities. So we'd advocate at some point and somehow for more support in meeting those needs in the short term and clearly not to be a long-term solution. And then there's potentially some statewide training. All facilities are increasing their training around mental health and trauma. But there's been talk from MNJDA and in partnership with Aspire Association. I'm not sure who's familiar with Aspire, but about creating a training academy around mental health and trauma that potentially might need some support fund-wise to get off the ground, where workers who work in a residential treatment facility and workers that work in a corrections facility can do 4 weeks of online training over a 6-month period and get that level of training they need to be effective with the youth we're serving. So you hit on a couple of topics that are really starting to kind of get moving in our area. And I think there will be some opportunities down the road for some support around training and increasing mental health services in correctional facilities over the short term.
Right. And I'm hearing that would be kind of a strong recommendation besides just the trauma, but working with the population that happens to be going through more of the correctional side, needing more mental health support.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm
Thank
going to, thank you, just, we have one more testimonial, and so I thought, I know if we have questions, we'll have other times, I think, to ask, but at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Al for the last testimony.
So thank you, Mr. Bauer, for your testimony. So our last testifier is Leslie Chaplin. She is the former administrator for the Woodland Hills Residential Treatment Facility that was located in Duluth and closed in 2021. So welcome, Ms. Chaplin.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today. I am really touched and moved by all the testimony that's been given so far. I've actually taken a few notes to comment on some of that as I move forward on this. I will try to be brief. This is an incredibly complex topic. It is incredibly important for our kids and families in the state. And I am really grateful for all of you for taking the time to do this and for inviting me in to talk about this. My name is Leslie Chaplin. I have been working with children and families since 1991. So I have a little bit over 30 years of experience, primarily in children's mental health, as well as juvenile justice, especially at Woodland Hills. I have a master's in social work from the University of Minnesota. I have a LICSW, which is licensed independent clinical social worker. So that essentially means therapist since 2002. I have a PhD in organizational leadership that I pursued after being promoted through residential and day treatment programs to become in the C-suite, the chief operating officer, and then chief executive officer, and felt that I needed a little bit more education there. So I have an incredible passion for this work and have continued to devote my life to this. I'm wondering if Layla is still in the room there. I just wanted to make a couple of comments in regards to some of her comments, and it would be great if she hears this. I want to say thank you for your resilience, for your incredible words and ability to sit in a room and share. We all are probably shaking a little bit when we have to do large public speaking. You were incredibly well spoken and you represented youth, successful, resilient youth in a very moving way. For all of us that have worked in this field for so long, for those critical floor staff and direct care mentors that make the biggest difference, your story is why they stay. We talk about staff turnover being the biggest problem. It is the biggest problem. We need more staff. One of the ways we do that is by sharing success stories. I have research on a concept called vicarious resilience. Vicarious resilience is what direct care staff who work with kids in trauma can learn to develop, and that will keep them in our positions, as many of us have been for our whole careers, whereas our young professionals now, when they come in, their average length of stay is about 3 years before they are burned out, before they have vicarious trauma, before they're not able to show up to work anymore because they have their own symptoms of trauma. So this is a larger problem, and this is a whole different presentation. So I'd be happy to talk more about that in the future if anyone's interested. She talked about structure. Layla talked about structure. What we know about structure is when we have external structure, it allows us to build internal structure. So that's what we're providing for these kids. And the ones that are able to integrate that and move forward and making those good choices with their own internal structure, that's what makes the difference, whether it's in juvenile detention or whether it's in residential treatment or whether it's in foster care. She mentioned her mentor, one caring adult. The research will say even one caring adult who's there consistently is going to make all the difference in a youth being able to overcome their challenges and being able to move forward. Another big piece of research is about high school graduation, whether that's GED or actually high school graduation. So when we talk about education, that is incredibly important that we focus on that and we make sure we get the kids through at least that process. Mr. Bauer talked about graduations in treatment centers, graduations in correction centers. I've been to many of those, and those are some of the biggest celebrations I have ever been at, because these are kids who had to overcome many challenges and become more resilient. One of the things she also talked about was having services in her community closer to home. I want to talk about minimizing transitions. What we know from residential treatment, especially when they have to be sent, and juvenile detention, especially when they have to be sent way up to Duluth, if they're not from the area, is that time when they have to leave and go back is incredibly disruptive. The more we can get services closer to kids' communities, their schools, their friends, if they don't learn in their communities about how to build more stable and productive relationships, when they return back, what they have learned before, they're going to have a really hard time implementing at the new place without that external support system, because all of that past is waiting for them. And it takes an incredible amount of strength to not shift right back into some of that pressure from where you started. I think keeping the doors open for collaboration between juvenile justice, social services, mental health, all of those. If we could be able to get into each other's programs, have shared treatment plans, I believe that was mentioned, work together across systems as teams, including the schools, that would make a huge difference for kids. We're all involved in their lives anyway. We just silo it out and section it off. And every time a kid has to go to a different kind of a place, they have to start relationships all over again. All of these kids have had difficult times. If you look at ACE scores, adverse childhood experience scores for these kids, they're all going to be really, really high. That means they have damaged relationships. That makes it that much harder to form new relationships. So every move, every transition, every time it's a new staff, they start over with that. And it's harder and harder to trust, and it's harder and harder to be vulnerable with people. So that's a pattern that we see all the time. The other thing I'll mention quick that Layla talked about was being slapped on the wrist, looking for limits. Kids are looking for limits, whether it's your 2-year-old having a tantrum, whether it's a 13-year-old who has made some bad decisions in the community and has been arrested. They're looking for someone to help them identify that external control so that they can feel safe. Certainly there are outliers. Certainly there are people who have more of the sociopathic tendencies, people who are predators. I'm not talking about the far extremes of the system. I'm talking about 90% that stretches in the middle. On the far extreme of mental health, you might have your severe psychotic disorders, people who have childhood schizophrenia, really severe mental health, all the way to the other end of juvenile justice, where you have that real criminalized, very, very antisocial, no empathy. Those are very extremes. Most of the kids we see, most of the families we work with are going to fall not at those extremes. And most of what comes up as these behavioral things, especially the aggression, because that's kind of the deal breaker for a lot of places where kids get moved out, comes from trauma, comes from learned experience, comes from survival. So getting to the root of those things is really critical to being able to dissolve those things. And that's where those key staff come into play. I want to make a few comments too on Mr. Bowers from M&JDA. He talked about safety. That is absolutely the number one issue. Critical incidents. Those are the things where kids do bounce. I use the word bounce. They go from foster care to a treatment center, to a detention center, back to the treatment center, out to the foster care center. The red statement earlier about that full continuum of care, that statement was right on. If you guys take a moment and actually pick apart each of those sentences in that red statement, you're going to see the broken chains of these systems that doesn't link together, especially involving the inpatient hospitalization. We need to link all those things together so the kids don't just get dropped. Really savvy kids in the juvenile justice system know very well how to fall right through a crack so they don't have to deal with any of us anymore. We need to make sure they don't have that option. And we need to make sure that our mental health kids are getting the care that they need in that way as well. Looking at my notes here, sorry, I'm going to move on. Okay, so as I was at the Hills Youth and Family Services, Woodland Hills, for 3 years. Prior to that, I was at Northwood Children's Services for 7 years on the executive team. A term that's been brought up, PRTF, Psychiatric Residential Treatment Facility. This is fairly new in our state. We've only had them for a few years. Prior to that, we just had residential treatment. PRTFs brought all kinds of hope throughout our whole system. Northwood was where we built the first PRTF. It was understood that we were going to take all these kids that had been sent out of state, all these kids that had high aggression. The reality, when you get to the licensing and you get to things like that, is the rules and the regulations did not allow for that. And it was more of a hope to solve the problem that you guys are sitting with today. So a PRTF is an incredible important part of this, of the continuum, but it's not, as it was once hoped, going to be the solution to everything. Woodland Hills had the second PRTF in the state. That was down at Cambia Hills in East Bethel. Due to a number of factors, including COVID, including George Floyd, and just including some decisions on behalf of the Hills Board of Directors and previous CEO, I had to bring the company through bankruptcy and to a close. This is a company that's served youth and families since 1900 in that original location in Duluth, primarily juvenile justice, incredible work in the 80s, 90s, 2000. And then things really shifted. They shifted in funding, specifically through probation. Instead of funding day treatments, they switched to serving probation instead of the day treatment. So they had to switch to more mental health. The mental health system, the juvenile justice system, don't play well in the sandbox together. And I mean that not as far as the individual people, I mean that in terms of the system. There's completely different rules and regulations to get into these programs for the kids. When you're a dually licensed facility like the Hills was, you have essentially 2 tracks you have that kids can come in the building by. When you're not on the extreme ends of the continuum of the needs of the kids, there is not that much difference in these kids. They all have really rough experiences that include a lot of trauma. They all have had significant disruptions in their relationships. They are all scared to death. They are all confused. And whether you go in front of a judge and get court ordered and brought to me in a police cruiser, or whether you go in front of a therapist because you just got out of a hospital for a suicide attempt, and you come to me with your foster parent, the issues, the feelings, the place in their lives are not at all different. Our mental health kids have significant behavior problems. Our juvenile justice kids have significant trauma and mental health problems. All of that falls under social services. My role at Woodland Hills when I came in was to really look at the juvenile justice side, the mental health social service side, and do what I could to actually bring those two together. Yes, there's a lot of research that says you can't treat delinquency along with social service kids. I would challenge that only to the extent of what Mr. Bauer was talking about, is we look at risk factors. So you might have a program that has all those kids, but you divide them up by age, by possibly gender, by level of risk, and by need. So it's less about whether someone went in front of a judge or they went in front of a therapist. It's more about vulnerability. What are the levels of vulnerability? You can't have predators with victims. There are tons of kids in the juvenile justice system who do not have the savvy, who do not have the ability to manipulate, to connive, to premeditate. They were in the wrong place at the wrong time, and someone convinced them to come along and do this because they didn't have the capacity to understand their own ability to make decisions in the moment in that peer pressure. Those kids need all of that external environmental structure. They need all of that support as they're coming up, just like the mental health kids do. I have mental health kids that can be just as physically violent and aggressive as as my juvenile justice kids. And so understanding how to deal with those issues. I really appreciated the comment from MNJDA about partnership. We had that started at Woodland Hills only for kids on probation because our program up here, AJC, could not take kids unless they were on probation. But if I had a kid that had assaulted a staff or another kid, and we were able to talk to their probation officer and they were able to go to AJC for a couple of days, they would much rather be with me than at AJC. And they felt that immediate consequence of, do you really want to blow this? Or do you want to stay where we can really work on some stuff? And that was a beautiful partnership, but it worked very rarely. So that is definitely an area for improvement. The current landscape also includes CTSS, that is Children's Therapeutic Services and Supports. This is a mental health insurance build program. This is a program that can get into communities, into homes. It can be in schools. It can do day treatment programs. We can take any kid that has any kind of a diagnosed mental health condition. If you're in delinquency, you have many options of mental health things that we talk about: oppositional defiant disorder, conduct disorder. Those are mental health conditions. So really seeing that as a broad way to address things and to get that support in there. Licensing requirements, I want to talk quickly. Department of Corrections, Department of Human Services, like I said already, extremely different. Minnesota Department of Health, they're involved in the psychiatric residential treatment facilities. And then Minnesota Department of Education. So they're, when we're talking about kids, we're talking about education and those important pieces. When we look at all of those coming together and you look at all the rules and regulations, specifically in a psychiatric residential treatment facility, it's almost impossible to be able to navigate the situations we have to navigate. That is the PRTF rules, regulations, licensing structure for Woodland Hills down at Cambia Hills is what ended up really causing the closure of the program. There was an incredible risk taken to open this huge facility. It's beautiful, serve all these kids. Unfortunately, the rules and regulations were not something that those program directors were able to follow. I went down after some significant problems to try to pull things back together. There were 33 license violations on that PRTF. Interestingly, the Department of Human Services had given the license just 6 months earlier with all of those things stated in their policy and procedure of what was going to be happening. But then 6 months later, when they came in, many of those things were then violations. And so I'm not sure what's going on in that whole system, but those are things that absolutely have to be addressed in terms of how kids get in and out of our programs and how our programs are regulated to make sure kids stay safe and things are done in an effective way that with the kids' needs at the center and the family. There's another thing that's up and coming that I just want to mention, that's high fidelity wraparound. That is something that I think has tremendous potential to be able to get in our communities, just like CTSS is in our communities. High fidelity wraparound, it has some research going on. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with that. It's very family centered. It's community based. So just in terms of evidence based, that's ready to roll. That would be a high level of recommendation for me. Well-trained long-term staff. We just heard a little bit about training from someone who asked that question. Training is important. What often happens is coverage for the shifts takes priority. So when you don't have enough staff already because you've had turnover, because people have gotten burned out, or people can find a job paying more somewhere else, when they should have been gone to training, they end up getting pulled to work. So they miss their training. And that happens over and over and over. And so then you have new staff working the floor who don't have the relationships with those kids, who don't have the long-term confidence and knowledge of how the program works. And right there begins the recipe for disaster where things start to snowball. So that staffing ratio, that staffing expertise and training, in my experience and in my opinion, is one of the most critical. Without staff, you're not helping kids. And any staff, no matter how good they are, if they're working 8, 10, 12, 14 days straight with no break with kids who are traumatized and aggressive, they're not going to be able to stay very long. In our mental health systems, where we primarily are sustained financially through insurance billing through MCOs, the average rate we're able to pay our staff members is $17 to $22 an hour. They can go to McDonald's or Walmart and make $17 to $22 an hour. And those places also offer them benefits and sometimes even opportunities for further education. We have to increase our ability to pair staff. That will help us get more staff coming and help us be able to serve more kids in better ways.
So Leslie, we probably just have just a couple more minutes left here. There's a couple options. I know if you're still going through your testimony, we could still have you put it in writing. For the rest of the group here, we also wanted to have some time a little bit for kind of reflection. I don't know if people are ability to kind of stay a little bit later after the 12 o'clock time frame. So
Thank you.
any questions from the group?
Hey, I have one, Mr. Chair, if there's a little bit of time, just if she could expand just a little bit more on the DHS regulations or federal regulations that are problematic for facilities dealing with the mental health components and licensed by DHS in particular. What are the barriers by regulation that really make it difficult for these facilities to stay open?
Sure. The primary thing we experienced at Cambia Hills is at East Bethel is the requirement, this was actually brought up earlier, the requirement for increased staffing based on a critical incident that might occur. So a very specific example is there might been board games, kids were playing board games. And the ratio of staff to students in a PRTF is 1 to 3. So there is a lot of staff right there all the time for students. Also, some students are, and I'm saying students, clients, patients, however you want to call them. Staff turned their back for a moment. A student took a small metal game piece and swallowed it. That required having to go to the emergency room. The Department of Health, so then we have to report that. So a lot of reporting. Department of Health then came in to investigate that, then required very intensive, lengthy process for counting every piece in a board game and keeping a tracking sheet for every board game on how many pieces there were before it got taken out and then when it was packed up and put back away. And then we had different requests and regulations from Department of Health and Human Services as compared to the Department of Health. So lots of labor intensive. Also mandating one-on-one staffing. We don't have the ability to bill more for one-on-one staffing because we're dealing with insurance companies. So that was at our expense, which the reimbursement rate at that point in time was much lower than it is now. It has been raised, not much, but it has been raised a little bit for PRTF. So that was part of the financial struggle in terms of the Hills being able to stay open is the requirement for one-on-one staffing. Really quickly, finally, a position that I have just left, a private company here up north was, I had applied for them for CTSS with DHS. Children's Therapeutic Services and Supports. We submitted our application on June 15th. They have 5 weeks to return our application. 5 weeks came and went. We never heard a word. It wasn't until early October that we heard anything back as far as our approval. We had to kind of continue to go up the ranks, and I sincerely appreciate help from folks like Diane and others that helped us get that certification. But we had potentially 16 spots where we could have helped kids immediately. And now that program is shut down because the licensing and the credentialing took too long to get.
Thank you very much, Leslie. We have one last question. Diane?
Thank you, Leslie, appreciate that. And in addition on the CTSS, it's also provider enrollment, which is a whole nother side.
Yes.
So getting people to communicate to each other would be another recommendation, even in our own organization. I know that's one of the big barriers once you get certified and licensed. My question actually is on the PRTF. You mentioned that there was, I know that the Department of Health had a response to an incident, and that was one of the areas that created a barrier. But also from a DHS side, on the policy side, you said that there was some inconsistency for what was originally the intent and then what ended up to be a policy. If I'm going to explore that, if there's no time to address that in this time frame, can you reach out to me so I can get more information on that and see what follow-up can be done on that, or I mean, that's my area, obviously. So I would like to know more information on that. And also that way we can look forward at recommendations of what that would look like going forward to overcome some barriers. But if you can speak to, were there discrepancies in the initial intent or what was verbalized, and then what policy created barriers?
Yes, so it was all the policies were written and approved, and a PRTF license was given, services began. Then as things were implemented, physical holding policy, for instance, there was no, and I came in after. I didn't write the initial policies. I came in to try to fix things. There was no standardized training on physical interventions. Kids were being put in restraint chairs and being administered PRNs as opposed to any de-escalation training or anything like that. That should have been, like, right off the bat, that should have been part of what was in the policy of what would happen. And so as we had to change those things to get those things instituted, that's where we already had the violations. But that was approved at the beginning. So had the initial approval been accurate, though, some of those further things wouldn't have come up.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I know we have Department of Human, Leslie, thank you very much for your testimony. And also I just want to make sure that you know that Layla was still in the room during making the comment, so.
Wonderful.
Thank you. So, thank you very much. A lot of good information there. So the kind of the flow of these meetings is the last part of this. We want to kind of provide about 20 minutes as an opportunity, you as members of this task force working group, to kind of just reflect, think about kind of what are some of the key things that you heard today. What are some potential recommendations that we want to kind of gather as part of this panel? And hoping we just spend some time a little bit to kind of talk about that, and you share that information. And as you do so, just make sure you share who you are, your name, and also what your thoughts are on recommendations, so we can capture that as part of the notes. What we're planning on doing is kind of capturing all these things. And so we're kind of at the end of the time frame when we're putting the report together, we have all of these kind of recommendations that are able to eventually then able to go into the report. And how the meetings are flowing is pretty much how we're going to do this over the next 3 to 4 meetings. We're going to go ahead, maybe some business in the front end that we have to take care of. We're going to offer up testimony, and then we're going to have an opportunity for debriefing, discussion, and then final recommendations as well. So maybe we'll just turn it over to the panel members or all the committee at this point in time to see what were some of the key learnings, the key things that you heard today that really struck something with you to say, you know, this is really important. Think about kids and children and family that we're serving. That is really, we need to really think about and put into our final report. So, any thoughts?
Hi, all. Nikki Conway, Scott County. I think the overarching theme that I heard is I really want to underscore what I think Leslie just talked about, which is this idea that we're working with either juvenile justice kids or social services kids. I think I would strongly agree that that's a myth. Specifically because if we can understand we have so much subjectivity in all of our decision making, how do we, like, whether it's related to disproportionate contact from law enforcement, charging, plea deals, adjudication, all of those things in that system, as well as in our child protection system, it's difficult for me to wrap my head around that young people are different in that way, and that for some reason, young people who come up through a juvenile justice system don't have the same significant mental health needs that young people who are in mental health systems do, and the racial disparities that exist in both of those systems. So to that end, I also hear it in the licensing argument around DOC licensed, DHS licensed. I have worked in, so a little bit of background too, is I worked as a juvenile probation officer for a while, also worked as a social worker. I've been in the midst of these systems my whole career, both in Ramsey County and now moved to Scott County. So have had a lot of experience with places like Woodland Hills, with all of the correctional facilities. And I would argue that if we surveyed young people, they also wouldn't say, yes, I'm a corrections youth or a social services youth. That's not how the real world works, right? So to that end, we have these two parallel systems, and I think maybe our biggest opportunity is to actually talk about how those two parallel systems with different requirements, licensing, all of those things maybe blend a little bit so that we're really serving the needs of the young people and the families in a more comprehensive way.
I'll go. Swana Kirkland, Dakota County. I think what we heard today is youth telling us exactly what they need to be successful, how to not keep going through the same doors, right? And so I think some of the recommendations should be to listen and try to implement some of the things that they are telling us has been successful for them. And then to partner with more agencies like Minnesota JDI, right? Partner with them and listen to the work that they're doing and the places that they're going. And there's best practices around this country. There's places, there's states that's getting this right. There's states that's getting this right. So it's imperative for us to continue to support our leadership, our superintendents, Guy and I have facilities, and Monica, and CJ, and to continue to support the efforts to go out and really find who's doing this right and bring it back and try to implement that here in Minnesota. We don't have to recreate the wheel, but we do have to do better than what we're doing right now. And so I just want to, again, Bauer's phenomenal. I mean, but it's the collaboration of all of the facilities and the partners that's really saying, we can do this better. And so they just need the support and yes, the funding. I found in Dakota that I've opened the doors to my county commissioners. I've opened the doors to electeds. And so they are coming into the facility and they are seeing with their eyes and they're hearing with their ears. And that's more than any document I can produce and give it to them, but to open up the doors to continue to create pathways so folks can come in and see exactly what it is we're doing and what we need. Have a visual.
Thank you, Swana.
Jasmine Madison. And my takeaway was basically support and services is what is essential to improve the safety and staffing. That whether it's the youth getting the services that they need or the support, whether inside the facility or externally, but as long as the youth that are participating are given the proper resources and support and services, it then creates a safer environment for the staff, which I believe will increase the retention that the staff are having and the burnout that seems to be taking place. So for as long as we're focusing on what is best serving our youth to make it a safer place, I think it all just, one goes hand in hand with the other.
Thank you, Jasmine. Other reflections?
I think my key takeaway today, and we've spent a lot of time in this room and at our day jobs talking about how the needs related to mental health keep going up. Even if those numbers quantitatively were exactly the same, the facilities, the programs we're losing them, we're hemorrhaging them. And I recall a conversation we had once at Maxa where we said, well, where are they all going? What happened to the beds? Where have they gone? We know the answer to that. And I think it behooves us to capture that, the why we're losing programs, facilities, placement options, and how to stop that hemorrhaging, as well as how do we build capacity.
Thank you. No.
Yeah, just a quick comment. I couldn't agree more with that. I think asking the question why, I think the last testifier got to that a little bit. When you look at why facilities close, is it staffing? Probably. Can you maintain enough of the rules and the regulations surrounding the placement? I think it becomes very difficult for these placements to manage that. I think the mental health and differences between DHS and DOC are significant. I think the facilities are vulnerable to closure because of high-risk situations. And so I think also you can't lose sight of the care of the kids and the programming that exists. I think we do need to listen more also to the youth. Because in that listening, we'll see success, not just failure. And we will see also where we can improve overall. So as part of the Minnesota Juvenile Detention Association, our own county is and doing a lot of work on behalf of, I think last year we housed kids from 33 counties. So there's a big need out there for both secure, localized secure placement, but also an acknowledgement and non-secure placements, but just an acknowledgement of the difficulty of this work. Very, very difficult work. These staff do outstanding most of the time, but as we've heard also not all the time. So.
Thank you, John. Commissioner Levy, and I get one on.
Yeah, I'll try to be brief. Just as commissioner, we have a hospital. Every Friday I get a report that has all the beds and the time that people are waiting for placement elsewhere. So the staff and misery loves company, and then I'll give you lots of company. It seems like at every level of where we have to put people who are people in need of assistance, no matter what that is, whether it's age, whether it's they're able to, or whether it's mental health, no matter what that person is, staffing is just annihilating our ability to deliver services. We have people in HCMC that have been over 400 days. We're not equipped them, but we have no place to put them. And so I know that is a big effect, and I'm a big advocate, and I don't think it'll be part of this report, but we need to do more before kids get to where they get to us. That I tell mayors I talk to are like, what's the county doing? I'm like, what's the city and the schools doing? Because we're all together, we're not separate. And kids who have good active lifestyles, who have hope in front of them, always seem to do better than ones that don't. And so we all have a role. And, I was thinking we're at the end of the equation when there's so many variables that come that we all need to work together. I'm not pointing blame. I'm saying we all are in it together. So.
Yeah, Paula.
Hello, thank you. Paula Stocky, Deputy Director at St. Louis County Public Health and Human Services. I want to thank all of our testifiers today. Very helpful information. I have 5 key takeaways. I'll be quick. A couple are quotes, starting with first and foremost from our youth that we heard from, to acknowledge and embrace potential. And I think that can be something that should resonate through every step of our decision making. 2, that Minnesota can do better than using a correctional facility to treat mental health. And that supports the statement just made that, we need to intervene earlier and earlier to make these interventions so it's not happening and we're not resorting to sending kids to detention facilities because that's the only place that it's safe enough for them to get the support and treatment they need. 3, DOC and DHS, so the Department of Corrections and Department of Human Services, can do better across systems to best serve children, whether that be through licensing, through ratios, through staffing, through training. We can do better. And it's imperative that we work across those systems. 4, while in a detention center, it's essential for our youth to stay connected to mentors and to supports to help them transition back to community. And by supports, I mean very inclusive list, family, friends, providers at school that had previously been connecting with kids. Let's not cut them from their support when they go to a detention center, but let's bridge that much more actively and intentional, and or form connections there that can stay into the community. And then 5, I think bringing us back to our early conversation, we need more transparency around race and disparities and what we might need to do differently with respect to both. Thank you.
Thank you. Nicole.
Nicole Kern, Director of Morrison County Community Corrections, representing MACAC. I guess mine would just be more of a quick summary that, yes, we need to listen to our youth. Resiliency for both our youth and our workers is extremely important. And that we need to start asking staff, not exit interviews, but staying interviews. Why do you stay? People who continue to work in juvenile justice and in social services and deal with youth and families, the reason they stay isn't the pay, it isn't the glory. And in facilities, why do they stay? What makes it possible for them to stay, and how do we replicate that? And we need to applaud those people and lift them up. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. Any more reflections? Well, I appreciate all of the feedback and reflections and testimony today. It's a really great meeting. And so we'll start to capture those within the notes. And then from there, we'll actually then be able to take some of these themes too, which may help also guide us around testimony further to unpack some of those areas. So thank you very much. We are adjourned for today and have a great rest of the day.